5 junior officers burst out laughing the moment she walked into the naval mess hall. Civilian clothes, no medals, no rank. She didn't even look like she belonged here. But 30 minutes later, the largest warship in the world pulled up to escort her personally. This is the real story of Emily Carter and why the US Navy still calls her a legend. And trust me, you're going to want to watch this until the very end. If you believe respect should never depend on appearances, hit that subscribe button right now, because the next story might just change the way you see people forever. 5 junior officers burst out laughing the moment she stepped into the naval mess hall. Civilian clothes, no medals, no rank. To them, she didn't belong here. The clatter of cutlery slowed. Conversations dipped, and eyes followed her every move. She didn't react, just kept walking toward an empty table near the wide bay windows. They didn't know that 30 minutes from now, the largest warship in the world would anchor just offshore, and its presence would be for her. This is the real story of Emily Carter. How a simple woman, underestimated by everyone in the room, turned an ordinary lunch into a moment the US Navy would never forget. And here on A Simple Woman's Stories, we bring you true, jaw-dropping tales of women dismissed at first glance, until they rewrite the script. If you believe respect should never depend on appearances, hit that subscribe button right now, because the next story might just change the way you see people forever. The mess hall at Naval Station Norfolk was buzzing that afternoon. Outside, the docks bristled with activity, supply trucks unloading crates, sailors in crisp uniforms moving in formation, the faint hum of helicopter rotors overhead. Inside, the air carried a mix of sea salt, polished brass, and the smell of baked chicken from the serving line. It was International Fleet Week, a rare occasion when foreign naval officers, politicians, and dignitaries mingled freely with enlisted personnel. Emily's presence was an anomaly. Mid-30s, brown hair tucked neatly under a simple knit cap, wearing a navy blue cardigan over a plain white blouse, dark jeans, and scuffed sneakers. No lanyard. No guest badge. Her only accessory was a small leather satchel hanging from her shoulder. She moved with quiet confidence, her gaze calm, taking in the room like someone who'd been in much busier, much louder places before. She had barely pulled out a chair when one of the officers, Lieutenant Mark Hendricks, leaned toward his friends and smirked. "Lost, ma'am?" "The civilian lounge is 2 buildings over." His voice carried just enough to turn nearby heads. The others chuckled, and one mimicked her slow walk, drawing more laughter from a table of visiting officers in white dress uniforms. Emily didn't rise to the bait. She simply sat, placed her satchel on the table, and unfolded a paper napkin, her composure steady, her movements deliberate. The restraint was almost unnerving, but the looks kept coming, and the whispers were starting to take shape. She wasn't here to start a fight, but she wasn't here to be ignored either. From the far end of the hall, Chief Petty Officer Sam Torres watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. 20 years in the Navy had taught him the difference between an out-of-place guest and someone who belonged in ways others couldn't see. He noticed Emily's posture, shoulders squared but relaxed, feet placed in a way that gave her balance, eyes scanning exits without appearing nervous. That wasn't the body language of a lost tourist. The mess hall noise swelled again as trays clattered and sailors resumed their conversations, but the table of junior officers didn't let go. "Bet she's somebody's +1, one muttered. Another leaned back, smirking. "Or a journalist fishing for a scandal." The words floated over the tables, sharp enough for Emily to hear. Instead of answering, Emily reached into her satchel and pulled out a worn, leather-bound notebook. She flipped it open, jotting something with a fountain pen, quick, efficient strokes, before glancing up toward the wall of windows. From where she sat, she could see a slice of the harbor, its grey waters restless under the afternoon sky. Her expression didn't change, but her focus was absolute. At another table, 2 visiting British officers exchanged puzzled glances. "She's not staff, is she?" one asked quietly. The other shook his head, still staring at Emily like she was a riddle. Then, as if on cue, a sudden announcement crackled over the PA system. "Attention all personnel. Special arrival scheduled at Pier 12 in 30 minutes. Stand by for instructions." The mess hall's background chatter shifted. Heads turned toward the loudspeakers, and a wave of curiosity swept through the room. Emily closed her notebook, tucking it neatly back into her satchel. She sipped from a paper cup of coffee she'd brought in herself, seemingly unconcerned. But Torres caught it, the faintest curve of a smile at the corner of her lips. It wasn't amusement. It was the look of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen. The junior officers didn't notice. They were too busy watching her, still convinced she was nothing more than a misplaced civilian in their territory. What they couldn't know was that the next half hour would turn the entire room on its head, and that Emily Carter was the reason the US Navy's most formidable ship was steaming toward their harbor right now. The mess hall's clamor swirled around Emily like static, but the focus at one particular table never shifted. The 5 junior officers had grown bolder. A few nearby sailors, sensing entertainment, angled their chairs just enough to catch every word. It was the kind of slow-building spectacle that fed on itself. The more people watched, the more the instigators pushed. Lieutenant Hendricks tilted his head toward Emily. "Hey, ma'am, you here for the ship tour? Or just waiting for a sailor to buy you lunch?" His tone dripped with mock politeness. The other 4 grinned, elbows resting on the table like a jury ready to deliver a verdict. Emily didn't move. She kept her gaze steady on the harbor through the window, the same calm posture that had unsettled Torres earlier, but her stillness was misread as weakness. A petty officer from another table called out, "Careful! She might be some admiral's wife!" That drew scattered laughs, a few glances from foreign officers who didn't seem amused but stayed silent. The noise shifted from casual chatter to something heavier, edged with anticipation. Chief Torres set his fork down. He'd seen this before, a harmless tease mutating into a group sport. The difference this time was the target's reaction. Emily wasn't shrinking, she was letting them burn themselves out, her silence amplifying their insecurity, but Hendricks took it as a challenge. He stood, tray in hand, and strolled toward her table. "Mind if I sit, or do you need me to fetch you the civilian menu?" A ripple of chuckles spread through the room. Emily finally turned her head, meeting his gaze. Her eyes were sharp, assessing. "You're blocking the view," she said, voice low but clear enough for the nearest tables to hear. The subtle dismissal landed harder than a shout. Hendricks blinked, momentarily thrown off, but before he could recover, one of his friends called out, "Hey Mark, careful, she might outrank you in some secret knitting club." The laughter returned, louder now. Across the room, Torres's jaw tightened. He could feel the room dividing, the mockers on one side, the quiet observers on the other, and the clock on the wall ticked closer to the moment he suspected would change everything. By now, the mess hall had taken sides without a word spoken. On one end, the laughter rolled like a tide. On the other, quiet faces watched as if sensing they were witnessing something they might regret later. The air was thick with that unspoken current. Half cruelty, half curiosity. A young ensign with a phone in hand angled his camera just enough to frame Emily and Hendricks. He grinned as he whispered to his buddy, "This is going on the group chat." The tiny red light reflected off the table, unnoticed by most, but Torres caught it. Hendricks leaned in closer, resting his hand on the back of the chair across from Emily. "You know," he said, voice pitched for the room, "security's pretty tight on base. Civilians don't just wander in unless they've got a reason." He let the pause linger. Or, unless they slipped through. That was enough to spark the first real murmur of suspicion. Someone in the back called out, "Better check her ID!" Another voice chimed in, "Bet she's one of those activist bloggers. They love making us look bad." Emily's coffee sat untouched. She looked at Hendricks, then at the ensign filming, and her gaze was so steady it made him shift in his seat. "If you have something to say," she said evenly, "you might want to say it now. The clock's ticking." That line sent a ripple through the room, not loud, but it landed. Hendricks tried to smirk it off. "Ticking to what? Your ride home?" Behind him, one of his friends lobbed a crumpled napkin toward Emily's table. "Here, ma'am, so you can wave the white flag." The room erupted in laughter, a few sailors banging their trays for effect. A sergeant passing through stopped to watch, shaking his head with a faint smile, clearly thinking it was all harmless. Torres didn't share the sentiment. He could see the fracture lines forming, the kind that snap in an instant. The ensign with the phone whispered, "Man, wait till TikTok gets this." "Civilian woman roasted in the mess hall? It'll blow up!" Emily remained perfectly still, one hand resting lightly on her satchel. Her eyes flicked toward the clock above the serving line. 14 minutes to whatever was about to happen at Pier 12. She didn't know who else in the room had connected the dots yet, but Torres had, and the realization made him sit up straighter. If he was right, these next minutes would make the mockery they thought was so clever look like the dumbest mistake of their careers. The noise in the mess hall had swelled to a wall of sound, laughter, taunts, and the scrape of chairs as more people repositioned for a better view. It wasn't just the 5 junior officers anymore. Half the room was leaning in, either openly mocking or waiting to see if the woman in civilian clothes would finally crack. A corporal stepped forward, grinning like a ringmaster. "Hey, ma'am, you looking for the officers' club? Wrong building." The jab earned him a slap on the back from his friends. Emily sipped her coffee as if the room was silent, her every movement deliberate, unhurried. That only seemed to inflame them more. Another petty officer tossed a plastic fork toward her table. "For when they serve you humble pie," he shouted, drawing a roar from his corner. Phones were out now, not just one. 3, maybe 4 sailors held them at chest height, pretending to scroll while recording every second. Someone near the back muttered, "She's gonna lose it, wait for it." Chief Torres's eyes tracked the scene, cataloguing faces. This wasn't harmless anymore, it was a feeding frenzy. He caught sight of Hendricks whispering to the ensign with the phone, a smirk curling at the corner of his mouth. Then Hendricks stood again, walking right up to Emily's table with the exaggerated swagger of someone performing for an audience. "You sure you're allowed to be here?" he asked, loud enough to reach the far wall. "Or are you just killing time until security escorts you out?" Emily looked up slowly, her gaze sweeping the room. When she spoke, her voice was calm, almost too quiet for the nearest tables to hear, but they leaned in, sensing something. "I think," she said, "you'll find out soon enough who's escorting who." The line hung in the air like a static charge, confusing just enough people to cut the laughter in half. A few glances darted toward the window, where the harbor's grey expanse shimmered under the midday sun. But Hendricks didn't back off. "That's supposed to scare us?" he said, gesturing to the room. "You're just—" He never finished. The deep, resonant blast of a ship's horn rolled through the mess hall, rattling trays and silverware. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Outside, through the wide glass panes, a massive shadow loomed, a carrier so vast it seemed to swallow the pier. Torres stood instantly, his lips moved, almost too quiet to hear. Gerald R. Ford. Emily set her coffee down, folded her napkin, and rose to her feet. Every eye followed her now, the laughter gone, replaced by the stunned silence of a crowd realizing the game had just changed. The horn's echo had barely faded when the first sailor shouted, "No way! That's the Ford!" Chairs scraped back in unison as half the mess hall pressed toward the windows. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the Navy's most advanced aircraft carrier, was easing into its berth like a steel island, the sunlight flashing across its tower. Phones that had been pointed at Emily moments earlier now pivoted toward the spectacle outside. Still, the recordings kept rolling, some capturing both her and the warship in the same frame, a visual contrast too striking to ignore. Down at the pier, a formation of sailors in dress whites stood at attention. Among them, a captain in full regalia glanced toward the mess hall's glass and tapped his watch, as if signaling to someone. Emily stepped toward the exit without hurry, her satchel resting easily at her side. The murmurs followed her, first confusion, then dawning realization. Hendricks's smirk faltered as he watched her cross the room. "Wait, she's not—" Torres cut him off, his voice low but firm. "You might want to stand down, Lieutenant, now." Outside, the hum of the carrier's engines was matched by a growing crowd on the pier. A Navy band struck up a sharp, brassy march. Emily walked down the steps from the mess hall to the dock, her pace steady. That's when the first shout went up from the pier crew. "Commander Carter!" The title hit the mess hall like a dropped anchor. Heads whipped back toward Hendricks and his crew. No one laughed now. Phones captured every moment. Emily's handshake with the carrier's captain, the crisp salutes from the side party, the instant respect from every uniform on the pier. The footage was electric. The civilian woman they had mocked only minutes before was being welcomed like senior brass. Within minutes, the videos hit base group chats and leaked beyond the gates. The contrast was cinematic. Mess hall jeers on one clip, carrier honors in the next. A TikTok edit stitched the two together with the caption, "From roast to respect in 30 seconds flat. Views skyrocketed in hours." Back inside, the silence was suffocating. Hendricks stared at the floor. The ensign, who had been filming earlier, now scrolled his own feed, his face pale as the video replayed on loop. It was their voices in the background, their laughter caught forever. Torres walked past them toward the door, pausing just long enough to say, "You just went viral. Congratulations." By the time Emily reached the gangway, the video had already spread far beyond the base. Sailors on other ships were watching on break, laughing, but not at her. The mess hall footage, paired with the pier reception, had become a textbook case of don't judge by appearances. Up on the bridge, Captain Harris of the Gerald R Ford was already aware of the chatter. He met Emily halfway up the gangway, offering a crisp salute before breaking into a warm smile. "Commander Carter, we are honored to have you aboard." His voice carried over the hum of the band. Emily returned the salute with quiet precision, then stepped onto the deck. Cameras, both official and personal, captured the moment. The ship's crew lined the rail, cheering in a way that was rare for Navy formality, but no one stopped them. Back in the mess hall, the room had thinned out. Those who remained avoided each other's eyes. Hendricks sat rigid, replaying in his mind every smug word he'd thrown at her. The sharp sound of a phone notification broke the tension. Someone had tagged him in the viral clip. He didn't need to look. The heat rising in his neck told him exactly what was happening. On the pier, Emily exchanged a few words with the captain, then glanced back toward the mess hall's glass wall. From that distance, she could still make out the cluster of figures watching her, their postures shrunken. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just held their gaze for a long, steady beat before turning back to the ship. Within an hour, the video hit national military forums. Comments poured in, respect earned. "She handled that like a pro. Mess hall needs a wake-up call." News outlets picked it up next, running headlines about the viral moment when a Navy commander in plain clothes was mistaken for a civilian intruder. By late afternoon, the base's commanding officer had called an unscheduled all-hands meeting. The message was clear. Professionalism was non-negotiable, regardless of rank or attire. There was no need to name names. The footage had done that already. Emily spent the rest of the day touring the Gerald R Ford with Captain Harris. They walked the flight deck, visited the CIC, and stood at the bow watching the harbor traffic below. Sailors approached her with quiet respect, some asking for advice, others just wanting to shake her hand. Before she departed, Harris offered her the ship's challenge coin, a gesture reserved for moments of extraordinary recognition. "For today," he said, "and for the way you carried yourself before anyone knew who you were." As Emily stepped back onto the pier, the band played once more. She didn't look back at the mess hall. She didn't need to. The day's events had already rewritten the story of who she was in every mind on that base. By nightfall, the mess hall incident had become more than just a viral clip. It was a cultural lightning rod. On TikTok, edits were multiplying by the minute. Dramatic slow motion of Emily walking out, spliced with the booming arrival of the USS Gerald R Ford. YouTube channels that thrived on military content dissected the footage frame by frame, praising her composure and condemning the jeering. One compilation, titled From Civilian to Commander in 30 Seconds, hit 1 million views in less than 12 hours. It opened with Hendrix's smirk, froze on his face, and then smashed cut to Emily saluting Captain Harris. The comments section was brutal. "That smirk aged like milk," one wrote. "Betty wishes he could eat those words," another added. On base, the Command Master Chief made his rounds that night, speaking with division leaders. The message was consistent. Respect is a constant, not a conditional. Rumors spread that formal reprimands were already in motion for those who had publicly mocked Emily. By morning, the story had made its way to national news outlets. Headlines framed it as a cautionary tale, judging a book by its cover in the most high-stakes workplace imaginable. Military PR teams tried to pivot, highlighting Emily's service record and the Gerald R. Ford's visit, but the damage to the mess hall's image was done. In the enlisted barracks, sailors rewatched the clip on their phones, the audio echoing in the narrow hallways. Some laughed nervously, others just shook their heads. The younger recruits were quiet, absorbing the unspoken lesson. At the officers' club, the mood was even heavier. Hendrix and his friends were already pariahs, their usual table empty. Even casual conversation died when they walked in. Hendrix tried to brush it off, but his phone kept buzzing, mentions, tags, and direct messages he didn't want to open. Meanwhile, Emily went about her duties without acknowledging the storm she'd left behind. She spent the morning in meetings, spoke briefly with the base commander, and then reviewed training protocols with a group of junior officers. Her tone was calm, her focus unshaken. Online, her quiet response only fueled the narrative. "She didn't even clap back," one viral tweet read. "That's how you know she's the real deal." Supporters began sharing her past commendations, interviews from years prior, and even archival photos of her on deployment. She became, overnight, a symbol of grace under pressure, and an unspoken rebuke to every person in that mess hall. By the third day, the Command Investigation Office had already compiled witness statements, cross-referenced with the viral footage. There was no ambiguity. Every word, every smirk, every shove of a chair had been caught on camera. The base commander signed off on formal letters of reprimand for Hendrix and the two most vocal instigators. These would follow them through their careers, shadowing every promotion board. In addition, all mess hall staff and assigned security were ordered to attend mandatory professional conduct training, effective immediately. The security petty officer who challenged Emily without verifying her credentials was reassigned to a less visible post. No one argued. Policy changes came just as swiftly. A new directive outlined clear engagement protocols for all personnel on base. Treat every individual with respect, regardless of uniform or appearance, until identification is verified. Violations would carry direct disciplinary action. The document circulated by email and was posted on bulletin boards in every major facility. For Hendrix, the fallout was personal as well as professional. Friends stopped sitting with him. Superiors avoided informal conversation. He found himself on the least desirable shifts, his reputation scorched. The once easy swagger was gone, replaced by a brittle silence. The other instigators faced similar social exile. The mess hall, once their comfortable territory, now felt like a fishbowl. They ate quickly, left without lingering, and avoided eye contact. Emily, meanwhile, received an unexpected call from the Pentagon. The clip had reached senior leadership, and while the incident itself was regrettable, her handling of it had been described as exemplary in official channels. She was invited to speak at an upcoming leadership symposium about integrity and respect in joint environments, the USS Gerald R. Ford's public affairs team also reached out, asking permission to feature her visit in an upcoming Navy highlight reel. She agreed on one condition: the piece would focus on the importance of mutual respect across all ranks, not on humiliating the offenders. By the end of the week, the incident was no longer just a viral story. It had become part of the base's institutional memory. For some, it was a career-defining warning. For others, an enduring example of how a leader carries themselves under fire. And for Emily Carter, it was neither a victory parade nor a vendetta. It was simply a reminder of the values she'd always lived by, values now etched a little deeper into the culture of everyone who had witnessed that day. By the weekend, the mess hall video had outgrown its military niche. What started as a clip shared among service members was now trending under hashtag #RespectIsRank on mainstream social media. News anchors replayed the moment Emily turned to face her taunters, juxtaposed with the arrival of the USS Gerald R as if it were a scene from a Hollywood film. Veterans groups were some of the first to rally behind her. Across Facebook and LinkedIn, retired sailors and Marines posted messages of solidarity, sharing their own experiences of being underestimated when out of uniform. A popular veterans podcast featured an episode titled "Don't Judge the Civilian," dedicating 40 minutes to Emily's story and the broader issue of respect in and out of service. Civilian audiences connected with the clip for different reasons. To them, it wasn't just about military decorum, it was about workplace dignity, about how quickly people judge based on appearances. Influencers outside the defense world began stitching the video into their own content, drawing parallels to corporate boardrooms, hospitals, and classrooms. The message was universal. Respect should never be conditional. Non-profit organizations advocating for women in leadership picked up the story as well. One group launched a campaign called Lead Like Emily, offering free leadership webinars inspired by her calm, measured response. Within 72 hours, they reported record sign-ups. Even late-night comedians got in on the conversation, though their jokes targeted the recruits who mocked her, not Emily herself. In one segment, a host quipped, "Imagine thinking you're the toughest person in the room, and then the room salutes her." The line went viral on its own. Through it all, Emily remained quiet on social media. Her only public comment, a short statement to a military news outlet: "Respect isn't a sign of weakness. It's the foundation of strength." The quote was reposted thousands of times, often overlaid on a still frame of her walking down the pier beside the Gerald R. By now, the conversation had expanded far beyond that mess hall. What began as a moment of humiliation had transformed into a cultural talking point, one that showed no signs of fading. The momentum reached a tipping point when the Department of Defense's own Diversity and Leadership Office issued a formal statement, citing the incident as an example of why their new Respect Across Ranks initiative was critical. Within days, major news outlets were running think pieces about the cultural shift happening in the armed forces and how one woman's composure had catalyzed it. Civic organizations began hosting panels and webinars on professional respect, inviting both military and civilian leaders to share insights. Emily's name appeared on nearly every shortlist, but she declined most invitations, choosing instead to focus on a single, high-to-profile engagement that could make a lasting impact. That moment came at a joint military-civilian leadership summit in Washington, D.C. The ballroom was filled with over 500 attendees, uniformed officers, corporate executives, educators, and non-profit directors. When Emily stepped onto the stage in a simple navy dress, the room fell silent. She didn't recount the mess hall blow by blow. Instead, she spoke about the subtle, everyday decisions people make when faced with someone they don't understand. The strength of any team, military or civilian, isn't in how it treats its strongest members, she said, her voice steady. It's in how it treats the people it knows the least about. Her words struck a chord. Applause broke out before she could finish, and by the end of her speech, dozens of attendees were on their feet. The clip of her remarks circulated almost as widely as the original mess hall video, cementing her role not just as a figure in a viral moment, but as a credible, respected voice in the leadership community. By the close of the summit, several large organizations pledged to adopt new training modules on respect and inclusion, citing Emily's speech as their catalyst. Back at her own base, the mess hall incident had faded into the background for most, but the broader movement it sparked, both inside and outside the military, was still gaining ground. And for Emily Carter, That was the real victory, knowing the moment hadn't been wasted, but transformed into something that could outlast the headlines. Months later, the pier where the USS Gerald R had docked was quiet again. Emily stood there alone in the early morning light, the sea stretching endlessly before her. The noise of viral fame had faded, but the echoes of change it sparked still lingered. In training rooms, in leadership seminars, in conversations between strangers. She thought back to that day in the mess hall, the laughter, the whispered insults, the sting of being dismissed. Those moments could have broken her, but instead they became the foundation for something larger than herself. Emily didn't see herself as a hero. She wasn't seeking applause or headlines. She had simply lived by the values she believed in: dignity, composure, and an unwavering belief that respect should be the default, not the exception. A small naval vessel moved in the distance, its wake catching the sunlight. Emily smiled faintly. Change, she realized, wasn't about grand gestures. It was about steady, unshakable presence. And as the wind tugged at her hair, she knew the lesson would endure long after the cameras had gone. Strength is quiet, respect is powerful, and sometimes the simplest woman can leave the deepest mark. And that's how one quiet moment in a crowded mess hall became the spark for a movement that reached far beyond the base gates. Emily Carter's story isn't just about a viral clip or a single day. It's a reminder that dignity can cut through noise and respect can ripple across an entire culture. If this story moved you, I want to thank you for watching and for being part of a community that values these moments of truth. Here on A Simple Woman Stories, we bring you real, powerful tales of resilience and quiet strength, because sometimes the simplest voices change the loudest rooms. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of Emily's journey resonated most with you? Share your perspective in the comments below. Your voice matters, and your insight might inspire someone else. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next story, and if you're ready for more, you'll find 2 incredible videos waiting for you right here on the end screen. Each one carries its own spark, just like Emily's. I'll see you there.